Hi everyone, thank you for coming to this session. I'm Emily, I'm the Research Manager at Ataxia UK, and this is the research update on cerebellar ataxia. So just as an overview of what I'll be talking about today, I've got an update on Ataxia UK and what the research department have been doing. We'll talk about developments in the diagnosis of the ataxias, in identifying new treatments and in treating symptoms of ataxia. I've got a few global ataxia research initiatives to cover, and I'll talk about current clinical trials and finally any opportunities for you to take part in research. And after the presentation, there'll be plenty of time for questions. So first of all, what does Ataxia UK do to promote research? So this is for people that are a bit less familiar with us maybe. Ataxia UK has a research strategy which states that we aim to maximise the impact of research in improving diagnosis and developing treatments that are available to patients. And we do this in a really wide variety of ways. One of these ways is to fund research projects, and as part of this, we work as the link between researchers and the ataxia community. So we relay research updates to the community, but we also let ataxia researchers know what's important to patients to focus their research on those areas. We collaborate with researchers, with pharmaceutical companies, and with other charities wherever we see an opportunity that might promote research. And we organise conferences and workshops. So our last research conference was in November last year, and the next one will be in 2022 in Florida. And we'll be holding this along with the National Ataxia Foundation and the Friedreich's Ataxia Research Alliance, which are two charities in the States. And conferences and workshops are a really great way to get researchers together, to get them discussing ideas and driving research into the ataxias forward. So next I'll talk about developments in the diagnosis of the ataxias, starting with inherited ataxias. Now, as we learn more about the genes that cause ataxia, this means that more inherited ataxias can be identified and more people can be diagnosed with inherited ataxia. And this is done in clinics using ataxia gene panels. And this is one test that can look for many different forms of genetic ataxia. So for example, at the Sheffield Ataxia Clinic, they use a gene panel that has 195 different genes on. So they look for 195 genetic mutations that can cause ataxia in one test. And last year we reported on the discovery of a new genetic type of ataxia called canvas, and this was discovered by UK-based researchers, and they think that it might be a common cause of late onset ataxia. So if you have no specific ataxia diagnosis and you're interested to find out if you have canvas, then we recommend speak to your neurologist. And tests are not widely available for canvas yet, but they can be organised by the researcher that identified the mutation. So if you want more details about this, you can contact us at research@ataxia.org.uk for more details. So what about developments in the diagnosis of non-inherited ataxias? Professor Marios Hadjivassiliou from the Ataxia UK accredited Sheffield Ataxia Centre is a leading expert in non-inherited ataxias. And some of these ataxias are gluten ataxia and primary autoimmune cerebellar ataxia, or PACA. And these non-inherited ataxias start with a trigger, which starts an immune response in the body. And this immune response causes damage to the cerebellum. And the cerebellum is a region of the brain shown here in red, and it's the balance centre. So when you get damage to the cerebellum, that is what causes ataxia. So for a bit more information on PACA, Professor Hadjivassiliou published 2 papers earlier this year on this specific type of ataxia. And it's an immune-mediated ataxia, so it follows this process that I just described. And it's caused by the body launching this unnecessary immune response against the cerebellum and causing damage, which causes the ataxia. So sometimes with immune-mediated ataxia, we know the trigger. For example, in gluten ataxia, the trigger is gluten. But if the trigger is unknown, the condition is called PACA. So the first paper that Marios published is about how neurologists can diagnose PACA. So although there's no definitive test that they can do, this paper describes a comprehensive list of clues that neurologists should look for when they're considering the possibility that a patient has PACA. And following this, a diagnosis can be made if certain criteria are fulfilled and if an experienced neurologist or ataxia specialist has ruled out other causes. And this is a potentially treatable form of ataxia. So in the second paper, Professor Hadjivassiliou and his colleagues at the Sheffield Ataxia Centre treated 22 PACA patients with an immunosuppressive drug called mycophenolate. And this reduces the immune response, which is targeting the cerebellum, which is therefore causing the ataxia. And their results, using brain scans and ataxia rating scales, showed that those receiving treatment improved or stabilised, and those who didn't receive treatment, as you might expect, got progressively worse. So if you've been diagnosed with idiopathic ataxia and would like to explore the possibility that you might have PACA, we recommend that you speak to your neurologist about these publications, and if anyone would like me to send them the publications, then I can do so. So next I'll talk about development in identifying new treatments. And I'll start by covering gene therapy in the SCAs. So just as a reminder, this blue diagram here represents a gene, and genes produce proteins. So this is a healthy gene, there's no mutation, so it produces a normal protein and you get no disease. In the case of the SCAs, and I'm talking here specifically about SCA 1, 2, 3, 6, 7 and 17, there's an insertion in the gene shown here in orange, and this is the mutation that causes SCA. So when this gene produces protein, the SCA mutation is there and you get disease-causing protein, which leads to ataxia. And there's other proteins involved in this process called DDR proteins. And Triplet Therapeutics are a pharmaceutical company that recently announced that they were looking at gene therapies which target the DDR proteins that are involved to stop them from influencing this process which causes SCA. And many other studies have also shown in animal models that it's possible for gene therapy to target the gene that's causing the SCA and stop it from producing the disease-causing protein. So in other updates in gene therapy, in December 2019, Unicure, which is a leading gene therapy company, announced preclinical data on its gene silencing candidate called AMT150. And this is a potential treatment for SCA3. And gene therapy treatment has been approved for spinal muscular atrophy, which is another neurological condition, and clinical trials in ALS and Huntington's are showing success. And this is just to say that gene therapy is coming through clinical trials and it is being approved for other conditions. So this gives us hope for the ataxias. Next, I'll talk about developments in treating the symptoms of ataxia. The first project I want to talk about was a speech therapy project, and this was funded by Ataxia UK and a Swiss ataxia charity, and carried out by Professor Anja Löwit. So in this project, Professor Löwit and the speech therapists involved, they assessed speech of the participants in the weeks before therapy, and they do this by measuring specific aspects of speech such as volume, speed and intelligibility. They then delivered speech therapy over Skype, and this was a specific type of speech therapy called LSVT, and LSVT has been shown to work in other conditions such as Parkinson's. And following the LSVT sessions, the speech therapist again assessed the same aspects of speech, so they look again at the volume, the speed and the intelligibility. And importantly, they followed this up with patient questionnaires. So they asked patients if they found the sessions useful, if they were easy to take part in, things like that. And that's really important if this kind of therapy is going to be rolled out to other people with ataxia, because we need to know that it's possible for people to take part. And the results of this project were published this year. So after the LSVT speech therapy, participants had more breath available to speak, and this resulted in improvements in their voices, which sounded less strained. And although the study did not show improvements in the ability of others to understand participants, most participants felt that they were more clear, they had to repeat themselves less, and they were more confident. So this is a successful speech therapy project, which shows that this type of treatment called LSVT could be useful in treating people with ataxia. So what's next? The researchers involved now plan to study this in a larger group, which is always necessary to collect more information and data. And they suggest that LSVT should be considered by speech and language therapists treating people with ataxia, provided the impact of treatment is closely monitored. So if you're interested in trying LSVT, ask your speech and language therapist to contact Professor Anya Lowett, who's shown here in this picture, and her contact details can be obtained via the helpline. And there's also a breakout session on Friday at 3:30 or Saturday at 2:30, where we'll be discussing an online speech therapy project that we're working on with Professor Lowett. So next I want to talk about this IntraBio symptom relief trial. So IntraBio are a pharmaceutical company, and they recently announced positive results from their drug IB1001, which they tested in a clinical trial for Niemann-Pick type C, or NPC. NPC is a neurodegenerative condition which has ataxia as a symptom. And in this clinical trial, they were able to show that IB1001 targeted the ataxia symptom of NPC. And this included an improvement in the SARA score as part of the trial. And SARA is a way of measuring ataxia in the clinic. And IntraBio are currently carrying out a trial of this same drug in ataxia telangiectasia, and they're looking at developing it for other neurodegenerative conditions. So this is one to look out for in the future. Now I've got a couple of global ataxia research initiatives to update on. So these research initiatives are something that we've written about in the magazine and newsletter, so you might be familiar with the names. They're called SCA Global and ARCA Global. SCA Global focuses on dominant ataxias and ARCA Global on recessive ataxias. And the aim of both of these global initiatives is to create a network of ataxia specialists worldwide who can work together. And they'll work together to agree on standardised ways of collecting data from people with ataxia. And this is really important to help with clinical trials in the future. And they'll also help to facilitate access to people with ataxia who are willing to participate in clinical trials. So for rare conditions, if a researcher wants to carry out a clinical trial, it's quite often very difficult to find enough patients, because if you just look in one country for a rare condition, you might only be able to identify a few patients. So in order to find enough people to take part, you really need this global approach, and that's what these global initiatives are hoping to achieve. And as an extra aim, ARCA Global will also be focusing on diagnosis, so they'll be looking for genes that haven't yet been identified that could be used to diagnose people that have recessive ataxias. So all of this work is really important for rare conditions to make sure that in the future, when a treatment is ready to be tested, the ataxia community is ready for those clinical trials. So as an update on where both these projects are, they've both been launched, and there's a joint SCA and ARCA Global virtual conference planned for the 19th to 21st of October, so quite soon. And we'll be attending that, so you can look out for updates in our magazine and newsletter. The website for both of these has been launched, and working groups have been formed. They've started working on policies and protocols, so looking at ways that clinicians measure ataxia in the clinic and hoping to harmonise that between all different clinicians. And as another extra, ARCA Global are looking at projects to support by encouraging collaboration and providing samples and participants. So they're looking at ways to get researchers together that have a common interest, to get them to work together and share their ideas. So there's a few clinical trials taking place for cerebellar ataxia that I want to talk about. The first is an Ataxia UK funded trial, which is testing cerebellar transcranial direct current stimulation, or TDCS, and this is a trial taking place in Italy. And recent studies have shown that applying a low electrical current to the scalp may alleviate symptoms of ataxia. So this group shown here in this picture are looking at this in a range of ataxias, including Friedreich's ataxia, a number of different SCAs and MSA. And we expect their results in early 2022. This technique's also been studied specifically for SCA3 in the Netherlands and Germany, and a similar but slightly different technique is being looked at in Canada. So there's quite a few groups across the world that are looking at techniques like this, which could be a symptom relief treatment for a number of different ataxias. The Cadent trial, testing CAD1883, is something we've talked about in previous conferences, and this is a drug that has shown benefits in animal models of episodic ataxia type 2 and SCA2, and the phase 1 trial showed good safety. And unfortunately, the phase 2 trial that was planned has been suspended at the moment due to COVID-19. So we are seeing some delays to research caused by the pandemic, and unfortunately this is one of them. The Biohaven trial is something we've discussed at previous conferences as well. So Biohaven are a pharmaceutical company that carried out a phase 2-3 clinical trial evaluating a drug called troriluzole in SCA patients, and they carried out this trial for 8 weeks. And this is a symptom relief treatment, so it might be useful in a range of different SCAs. But in this 8-week trial, what they showed was that there was no difference between those that were receiving treatment and those that were receiving placebo, which is essentially a sugar pill. And they looked at this using the SARA ataxia rating scale. So on this short 8-week trial, there was no difference between those receiving the drug and those not. But they carried on collecting data for a year on an open label study. And the data they collected in this year showed that it might have been to do with the trial design, which is why they hadn't shown a difference, and that it might be worth looking at for longer. So they've started a new phase 3 trial now, which they'll continue for 1 year, and they'll focus on SCA 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8 and 10, and they'll also give a higher dose. So they're currently carrying out this trial in 210 participants. So we're very interested to see the results of this when they're released. So finally, there are a few opportunities for you to take part in research. So there's a few natural history studies taking place at the moment, and the point of a natural history study is to measure how the condition progresses over time. So there's the ESME project, which is focused on SCA3, and this is being coordinated by a group in Germany, but it's taking place across Europe. And there's EuroSCA, which is focused on SCAs 1, 2, 6 and 7. And the London Ataxia Centre is recruiting for both of these, so if you've been diagnosed with any of the SCAs listed here and you're interested in taking part, you can contact Nita on this email address. And the PROSPACS project is another natural history study looking at spastic ataxias. And this is a large study taking place across Europe, which includes a site in the UK and Canada. And the aim is to study spastic ataxias over time to learn about the progression of the condition. And the PROSPACS project are starting by looking at ARSACS and SPG7, which are 2 types of spastic ataxias. They'll also learn about biomarkers, which means markers of the disease, and animal models. And all of this will help to become ready for clinical trials in the future when a treatment is ready to be tested. The UK site, which will be in Cambridge with Professor Rita Horvath, will be recruiting soon, so you can look out for further details in our magazine and on our website, which will tell you how you can take part. And as an extra for this project, we are representing Euroataxia as a patient representative. So occasionally we need patient input on this project to get the patient voice across to the researchers. So if you'd be interested in providing that patient voice, please email research@ataxia.org.uk for some more information about how you could get involved. There's another ARSACS project which is looking at taking a measurement from the eye called OCT to find out whether this measurement could be used to diagnose ARSACS. And again, the London Ataxia Centre is recruiting. So if you've been diagnosed with ARSACS and are interested in taking part, you can contact NITA. And there's a number of healthcare surveys on our website for you to complete. The first is for those with a diagnosis of superficial sclerosis, and this is a rare condition which has ataxia as a symptom. And there's a research survey on our website from a team at UCL, and they're conducting research into the quality of life with superficial sclerosis. Along with our medical advisors, Ataxia UK are gathering information from people that have ataxia that also contracted COVID-19 or believe they contracted COVID-19. And from this survey, we hope to learn more about the impact of COVID-19 on people with ataxia, so that Ataxia UK and our medical advisors know how to support people better. And there's an opportunity to take part in a project from Google's AI for Social Good programme, which is called Project Euphonia. And the people behind Project Euphonia are collecting speech samples from people with speech difficulties. And this is so they can improve their voice recognition technology. So for example, Google Assistant, which you can use on your phone or you can use around the house to help with things, could be really, really useful, but it's not always very good at understanding people that have difficulties with their speech. So Project Euphonia are looking at gathering lots of samples from people that have speech difficulties in order to improve this technology. And there's the opportunity to receive a gift card if you complete their samples. And all these studies can be found on our website. So if you go to Ataxia Research and then taking part in research, there's a section for people with cerebellar ataxia, and there's a section for healthcare research, which is where we put the surveys. Thanks very much for listening. I've put my email address there, and there's also the research inbox email address. So if anyone has any questions that come up after this that they want to ask, please do email us. Otherwise, I'll take questions now.